My parents wrote a check to make the man I love disappear. They thought money could erase him from my life. But when he slid that check back across the table, his response changed everything. What he did next set off a chain of events I never saw coming, and it forced me to make a choice between the family I was born into and the future I wanted to build. This is the story of how their plan to control my life backfired in the most spectacular way. Need to start from the beginning, because context is everything. My parents aren't just wealthy, they're about image. My father is a man who believes every relationship is a transaction, and my mother is the social architect, carefully curating our family's place in the right circles. I grew up in a beautiful, cold house where everything was about potential and perception. Who you knew was more important than who you were. Then I met Leo, and Leo was the complete opposite of a transaction. It was a Tuesday, and the sky had just opened up. I'm talking about a torrential downpour that came out of nowhere. I was leaving the library, weighed down with books and no umbrella, because of course I didn't check the weather. My phone was dying and my ride had canceled. I was stranded, drenched, and honestly, just miserable. I ducked into the first open door I saw, which happened to be a small independent hardware store. It smelled of sawdust and paint, and it was warm. I stood there, dripping onto the welcome mat, feeling like a drowned rat. And then I heard a voice. "Rough day?" I turned around and there he was. He wasn't dressed in a suit. He was in a worn-out t-shirt and jeans, covered in a fine layer of dust. He worked there. He took one look at me, disappeared for a second, and came back with a clean, dry rag. "For your hair," he said. "It's clean, I promise." We started talking. I don't even remember how it happened. One minute I was apologizing for the puddle I was making. The next we were debating the best way to fix a leaky faucet and arguing over the most overrated superhero. He said Superman was too perfect. I argued that Batman was just a rich guy with issues. He laughed, and it was this genuine, easy sound that filled the whole store. The rain didn't stop for an hour. We talked about everything and nothing. He told me about his dream to start his own contracting business, not just work at the store. He told me about his mom, a nurse who worked nights, and how he helped with his younger siblings. There was no pretense, no performance. When the rain finally lightened, he walked me all the way home, even though it was in the opposite direction of where he lived. He didn't try to get my number. He just said, "Hope the rest of your day is drier," and turned to leave. I had to run after him to give him back his rag. And that's when I asked for his number. I just knew. I knew this was different. Our first official date was at a noisy, cheap burger joint. It was the best date of my life. Leo is solid. He's the most present person I've ever met. When you talk to him, he's really listening. He's smart in a practical, hands-on way that I find incredibly attractive. He can build a bookshelf, rewire a lamp, and then talk about his favorite historical documentaries with a passion that's contagious. We'd been together for about 8 months when I decided it was time for him to meet my parents. I was naive. I thought if they could just see how happy I was, how good he was, they would see past the dust on his jeans. I prepped Leo like he was going into a job interview. My dad will probably ask about your 5-year plan. My mom will comment on your manners. He just held my hand and said, "They're your parents. I just want them to see that I care about you." The dinner was a disaster from the moment we walked in. You could feel the chill in the air. My mother's smile was so tight it looked painful. She looked him up and down, and her eyes lingered on his shoes. They were clean, but they were work boots. My father started the interrogation before we even sat down. "So, Leo, the hardware business, is that a growth industry these days with all the big box stores?" Leo handled it with more grace than I could have. He talked about the value of personalized service and local knowledge. He was respectful, articulate, and kind. Then my mother accidentally spilled a full glass of red wine on his shirt. It wasn't a trickle. It was a flood. I froze. Leo just looked down at the spreading stain, looked back at my mom, and gave a small smile. "It's all right," he said. "It adds character. And it's not like I was wearing my best suit." He tried to make a joke of it. My mother didn't apologize. She just handed him a napkin and said, "Some stains never truly come out." I wanted to sink through the floor. The rest of the dinner was a blur of awkward silence and pointed questions. When we finally left, the car ride home was quiet. I was so angry and embarrassed. Leo was the one who broke the silence. "Well," he said, "that could have gone worse." I couldn't believe he was trying to make me feel better. "How could it have gone worse?" I asked, my voice shaking. He shrugged. "She could have spilled the whole bottle." That was Leo, always finding a way to lighten the load. But that was just the beginning. The wine spill was their opening move. The next time he came over 2 weeks later, she did it again. Another accident. Another glass of red wine. The chances of that happening twice are 0. It was a message. A very clear, very cruel message. "You don't belong here." It escalated from there. My mom started sending me articles. How to know if he's from the right background. The financial pitfalls of marrying young. Then one day, I was at their house and needed to look up a recipe. I used my mom's iPad. When I opened the browser, it was already logged into a dating app. Not just any app, an exclusive, members-only matchmaking service. And the profile was mine. She had used photos from my own Instagram. She had written a bio. It said things like, "Seeking a partner with established career trajectories and a family-oriented background." I felt physically sick. It was so invasive, so violating. I confronted her, and she didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. She said she was keeping my options open. She said, "He's a lovely boy, sweetheart, but let's be realistic. What kind of life can he really give you? You're used to a certain standard." I lost it. I told her that my standard for happiness had nothing to do with a bank account. I slammed my hand on the counter so hard a vase rattled. "Stay out of my life!" I yelled and I stormed out. The final straw, the moment that broke the last bit of hope I had, happened a week later. I was at their house helping my dad set up a new printer. I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water, and I heard my parents talking in the living room. Their voices were low, but I could hear every word. My dad's voice was cold. "He's a phase. He's using her for access. He sees a path to our money and she's too naive to see it." My mom's reply was even worse. "We need to do something more decisive. We can't let this go any further. We need to intervene before it's too late." I was so shocked my hand went limp. The glass I was holding slipped and shattered on the marble floor. The sound was like a gunshot. They both came running in. They saw me standing there surrounded by shards of glass, tears already streaming down my face. And instead of apologizing, my father doubled down. "We're only thinking of your future, sweetheart," he said, his voice patronizing. "You deserve someone from your own world, not him." I couldn't breathe. I told them Leo had never, not once, asked me for anything. That he was more of a man than my father could ever hope to be. I called them elitist snobs. I was screaming, crying, a complete mess. My father's face turned purple with rage. He told me I was an ungrateful child who didn't understand how the real world worked. I grabbed my purse and ran out. I could hear my mother calling my name, but I didn't stop. I drove home in a blur of tears. When I got to my apartment, Leo was there. He took one look at my face and just opened his arms. I collapsed into him and sobbed. I told him everything. He held me and let me cry. When I was finally spent, he looked at me, his own eyes full of pain, and asked the question that would haunt me. "Are you sure you want to do this? I would understand if you needed to take a step back from us, for your family. The fact that he was willing to let me go, to sacrifice his own happiness, just to make my life easier, told me everything I needed to know. No, I said, my voice firm for the first time all night. I choose you. I choose us. I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. The real battle was just about to begin, and it started with a phone call my father made that I knew nothing about. I decided to post about what was happening online, in a private forum. I needed to know if I was the crazy one. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of comments, all supporting me, telling me I was right to stand my ground. It was a lifeline. I showed some of them to Leo, and he got this quiet, thoughtful look on his face. That night, we were just watching a movie, and I could feel this tension coming from him. It was different from the usual stress about my parents. This was heavier. Hey, I said, pausing the film. What's going on? And don't say nothing. Something's up. He let out a long, heavy sigh and ran his hands through his hair. There's something I have to tell you, he said, his voice low. I didn't know how to bring it up. I was afraid it would make everything worse. My heart started pounding. Just tell me. He told me that the week before my dad had called him directly. He'd said he wanted to clear the air, man to man, and asked Leo to meet him for coffee. Leo, ever the optimist, thought maybe this was a turning point. Maybe my dad was finally ready to try, so he'd gone. They met at a quiet cafe downtown. My dad was already there, sitting in a booth with 2 coffees. He made small talk for about 5 minutes, asked about the weather, about the hardware store. And then he got to the point. He reached into his jacket pocket, Leo said, his voice flat, and he pulled out a check. He slid it across the table to me. It was a check for $12,000. My father looked Leo straight in the eye and told him he wanted him to break up with me. To make a clean break. To disappear from my life. Leo said he just stared at the piece of paper, the numbers swimming in front of his eyes. He couldn't believe it was real. It felt like a scene from a bad TV show. Then he slowly pushed the check back across the table. I'm not interested, he'd told my father. My dad, according to Leo, didn't even flinch. He just said 15 then. $15,000. A man in your position must have debts. This could be a fresh start. That's when Leo stood up. He looked my father in the eye and said, You don't get it, sir. I love your daughter. You can't put a price on that. And he walked out, leaving my dad sitting there with his untouched coffee and his worthless check. Leo had been carrying this secret for days, terrified that telling me would be the final explosion that shattered my relationship with my parents forever. He was afraid I'd blame him. I was shaking. Not with sadness, but with a pure, white-hot rage. I felt like I was going to be sick. I grabbed my phone. It was almost midnight, but I didn't care. I called my dad, he answered, his voice thick with sleep. Megan, what's wrong? I didn't even say hello. You offered Leo money? I hissed into the phone. You tried to buy my boyfriend? What is wrong with you? He was silent for a moment, and then he tried to play dumb. I don't know what you're talking about. $12,000. I screamed. At the coffee shop on Elm Street. Does that ring a bell? The silence on the other end was all the confirmation I needed. And then he did the unthinkable. He defended himself. It was a test, Megan, a loyalty test, and he failed. A man of character would have taken the money and been honest with you about it. I was screaming so loudly my throat hurt. I called him a monster. I said things I can't even repeat. Leo had to gently pry the phone from my hand and hang up because I was on the verge of throwing it against the wall. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there, trembling with anger and betrayal. The next day, I knew I had to face them. I drove to their house, my hands clenched tight on the steering wheel. Leo offered to come, but I knew it would be a war zone, and I didn't want him in the crossfire. When I arrived, they were both in the living room, acting like they were the ones who had been wronged. My mom had that worried mother look plastered on her face. "Darling, we were so worried about you," she said, reaching out to hug me. I stepped back. "Don't." We sat down. The air was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I didn't waste any time. "I know about the check. I know you tried to bribe Leo to leave me. My dad didn't even try the test excuse this time." He just looked at me, his expression cold. "It was for your own good. You're throwing your life away on a laborer." And then he delivered the ultimatum, the one I had always feared was coming. "It's time to end this, Megan," he said. "Break up with him. Come to your senses, or we will cut you off. Completely. Your tuition for your final semester? Gone. Your phone? Your health insurance? Your allowance? All of it. You will be on your own." My mother started crying. "We're doing this because we love you," she sobbed. I stood up. My legs felt like jelly, but I stood. I looked at my father, then at my weeping mother. "You don't get to buy my love, and you don't get to threaten me into obedience," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "If your love comes with these kinds of strings, then I don't want it. You're making a terrible mistake." My father roared, standing up as well. "You'll regret this. The only mistake I've made," I said, "was believing you actually cared about my happiness." I turned and walked towards the door. My mom rushed after me and grabbed my arm. "Megan, please, don't walk out that door." I yanked my arm away from her, so hard that I stumbled and knocked a small decorative table over. A ceramic figurine that belonged to my grandmother crashed to the floor and shattered into 100 pieces. I didn't even look back. I walked out, got in my car, and drove away, leaving the life I knew in my rearview mirror. The first few months were the hardest of my life. The financial hammer came down immediately. My tuition payment for my final semester was due, and it didn't arrive. I had to go to the financial aid office, humiliated, and explain that my circumstances had drastically changed. I applied for every emergency loan and last-minute scholarship I could find. I had to drop one of my classes because I couldn't afford the lab fees. Leo and I moved in together sooner than we'd planned. My lease was up, and his tiny one-bedroom apartment became our sanctuary and our prison. It was so small we could barely move around each other. We had our first real fight over something stupid, who used the last of the milk. We were both just so stressed and exhausted. I picked up 2 more freelance gigs and got a job waiting tables 3 nights a week. Leo took on every side job he could find, often working from 6 a.m. until 10 p.m. We were like ships passing in the night, leaving notes on the fridge because we were never awake at the same time. Our diet consisted of rice, beans, and the free meals I could sometimes bring home from the restaurant. I lost weight. The constant grinding pressure of being broke was like a physical weight on my chest. I was always one missed paycheck away from disaster. My parents would call every week or so. Sometimes my mom would use a sweet, fake concerned voice. "We just miss you, honey. Are you eating enough? You can always come home." Other times my dad would be on the line, lecturing me about the real world and my poor decision-making. It was a constant psychological warfare, designed to make me crack. The only bright spot was my younger sister, Clara. She was still in high school, living at home, but she was on my side. She'd text me secret updates. "Mom told Aunt Carol you're on a gap year to find yourself," she'd write. She even tried to send me $100 of her babysitting money. I sent it back, but I cried when I saw it. It meant everything to know someone in that house still saw me. Despite the chaos, or maybe because of it, I became fiercely determined in school. This was my education now, paid for with my own sweat and fear. I wasn't going to waste a single cent. I studied in every spare moment I had, on my breaks at the restaurant, on the bus, late into the night. For the first time in my college career, I made the dean's list. When I got the email, I showed Leo, and he picked me up and spun me around in our tiny kitchen, both of us laughing like maniacs. It was a small victory, but it felt huge. Then, a few months in, a break finally came. The owner of the hardware store where Leo worked decided to retire. He saw how hard Leo worked, how much he knew, and how the customers trusted him. He offered to sell Leo the business. It was a massive, terrifying risk, but it was also the opportunity of a lifetime. We scraped together every penny we had. Leo used all his savings. I took out a small personal loan. It was just enough for a down payment. Suddenly, Leo wasn't just an employee. He was the owner. The stress was immense, but it was a different kind of stress. The stress of building something, not just surviving. Around the same time, one of my freelance clients was so impressed with my work that she recommended me for a part-time, remote position at a digital marketing agency. The pay was stable, and it came with health insurance. I remember staring at the offer letter, tears in my eyes. Health insurance. It was such a basic adult thing, but it felt like I had just climbed a mountain. For the first time since I'd been cut off, we could breathe. We weren't rich, but we weren't drowning. We could afford groceries without calculating the cost to the penny. We could go out for a cheap pizza and not feel guilty. We started looking for a new apartment, a place that was truly ours. We found a one-bedroom with a small balcony and actual counter space in the kitchen. The day we signed the lease, we celebrated with a bottle of cheap champagne. We were building a life brick by brick with our own hands, and it was real. My parents, sensing that their financial leverage was gone, shifted their tactics once more. The guilt-tripping calls stopped. Instead, I got a formal-looking envelope in the mail. It was a graduation card, and inside was a check for $5,000. The note from my mom said, "We are so proud of your graduation. We hope this helps as you start your next chapter and make sensible choices." I knew what sensible choices meant. It meant leaving Leo. I stared at that check for a long time. $5,000 would have been a fortune a few months ago. It could pay off some of my loans. It could buy us a new couch. But I also knew it was a trap. It was the first thread of a new set of strings they wanted to tie to me. I took a picture of the check, and then I put it in a new envelope and mailed it back to them without a note. My freedom was worth more than $5,000. It was worth everything. Graduation day arrived. I had agonized over whether to invite my parents. Part of me didn't want them there to taint my achievement, but a bigger part of me wanted them to see me walk across that stage. I wanted them to see that I had done it without them. So I sent them an invitation. That morning, I was a nervous wreck. Leo's mom, Sharon, came over early to help me get ready. She was beaming with pride, and her excitement was contagious. Leo fumbled with my cap, trying to pin it straight, making a mess of my hair. We were laughing, and for a moment it felt normal. They came. I saw them during the ceremony, sitting in the back row. My mother in a designer dress, my father in a suit. They didn't cheer when my name was called. They just watched, their faces unreadable. Afterwards, while we were taking photos, they approached. My mom moved in for a hug, and I instinctively stiffened. It was awkward. My father shook Leo's hand with a grip that was clearly meant to be crushing. Sharon, trying to be the peacemaker, suggested we all go for lunch. My parents declined immediately, citing a prior engagement. I knew it was because they couldn't stand to sit at a table with Leo. A week later, my mom texted, insisting on a proper celebration dinner at the country club. I knew what that meant, a public display where they could pretend everything was fine. I refused. I agreed to meet them for coffee on neutral ground. We met at a quiet cafe. The conversation was stilted. They asked about my job, and when I told them about the agency position, my dad's face fell. "So you're still doing that internet marketing thing?" he said, dripping with disdain. Then my mom slid an envelope across the table. It was another check for $5,000. Again. "We want to help you get started," she said. "We can be a part of your life again. We just need to know you're going to be sensible." I looked at the check, then back at their expectant faces. This was the moment. I slowly pushed the envelope back towards her. "No, thank you," I said, my voice calm. "I'm good." My dad's composure broke. "This is ridiculous, Megan. You're throwing your family away for some guy. He's a nobody, that word. A nobody." It hung in the air between us. It was the final, ugly truth of their prejudice. I stood up. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just looked at them. "He's not a nobody," I said quietly. "He's the man I love, and he's worth more to me than your money will ever be." I left them sitting there, the untouched check on the table between them. But I wasn't done. I was tired of them thinking of us as struggling, pathetic kids. I wanted them to see the reality. A few days later, on a Sunday afternoon, I video called them on WhatsApp. "I didn't warn them," they answered, looking confused. "I didn't even say hello. I just flipped the camera around. See this?" I said, pointing the camera at my Dean's List certificate, framed and hanging in our living room. "I did that." I panned to our mortgage papers on the kitchen counter. "And this? We bought a house." Then I walked outside and showed them Leo, standing next to his work truck, which now had Leo's Contracting and Hardware painted on the side in bold letters. I gave them a slow, deliberate tour of our small, messy, wonderful home. The half-painted walls, the tools in the hallway, the garden we were starting. I flipped the camera back to my face. "You called him a nobody," I said, my voice steady. "You offered him $12,000 to disappear because you thought I deserved better. This is what that nobody and I have built in 1 year. Without your help, without your money, without your approval." My father's face was a mask of tight-lipped anger. "This is childish," he spat. "You're just showing off." "I'm not showing off," I replied. "I'm just showing you that you were wrong. You were wrong about him, and you were wrong about me." My mom chimed in, her voice trembling. "We miss you, Megan. We still think you're moving too fast. You don't get to have an opinion on the speed of my life anymore," I said. "You can be in it or you can be out of it. But if you're in it, you will respect my partner." End of story. I ended the call. I was shaking, but it was a good shake. It was the shake of finally saying everything I needed to say. That was 6 months ago. They've been quieter since. The texts are less frequent, less demanding. I'm not sure if they'll ever truly understand or give us their blessing. And you know what? I'm learning to be okay with that. Life isn't perfect. The roof on our house needs repairs. Money is still something we talk about and budget for carefully. Leo's business has its slow seasons. We still have arguments about whose turn it is to take out the trash, but we are happy. We are a team. We built this life from the ground up, with our own hands and our own hearts. Their plan to break us apart didn't just fail. It forged us into something stronger, something unbreakable. I chose love over money. I chose respect over control. And every single day when I wake up in the home we built together, I know it was the best decision I have ever made. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to stand up for who or what you love, please let me know by liking this video. And subscribe to Hopeful Endings for more stories about finding the courage to choose your own path.